ของพี่ยืนมาประคองยืนปลอบใจน้องเห็นน้ำตาคลอเบา
Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time here, my name's Peter and I make videos about my experiences in Thailand. Okay, so today's video is going to be a relationship video. I had eased back on these a little bit because I felt I was telling too many of them, but a lot of people have contacted me and said they've liked them, so I'm going to continue to put these videos out there. So the good thing about today's story is I have experience with this one. It happened to a good friend of mine. It took place about 20 odd years ago, so it's quite an old story. I can still remember it well. And I don't need to read it from a piece of paper, so I can just tell it to you. So what I'm going to have to do is talk in a roundabout way, and you're going to have to kind of read between the lines and guess what I'm trying to say. It shouldn't be too difficult. So as always, we'll kick off with the background on the two people I'm going to talk about. We'll talk about the lady first of all. Her name was or is Nantawan, and she didn't come from Isan, just for a change. She came from a suburb just in the north of Bangkok. It was very far out from Sukhumvit, another couple of kilometers, and she wouldn't have lived in Bangkok. That's how far it was, but she was living in Bangkok. Now, Nantawan worked in one of the big GoGo bars in Nana Plaza, and she wasn't a dancer, she was a bar girl. She worked behind the bar, and something I'll just tell you a little bit about the girls who work behind the bars, hostesses, waitresses, that sort of thing. Although they're not, unlike the bar girls or go-go dancers, if somebody wants to take them out of the go-go bar to enjoy their company for a while, these girls who are dancing, they'll go with as many guys as they can. The girls who work as hostesses, waitresses, cashiers, some of them do, some of them don't, but what you'll find is they have quite high expectations. They won't just go with anybody. They don't all do it. The ones who do it, they're quite particular. So either the guy has to be fairly handsome, young, quite muscular, or there's just something about let's not say young. I mean, there's older guys who appeal to these girls as well. Or the guy might be known to have a bit of money. You know, he doesn't throw his money away, but the girls know him, and he has a reputation of being not wealthy, but they know he's got a bit more money than the average kind of guy. So these are the sort of guys that these girls will go for. They won't just go with anybody. So she's working in this, we'll call her Nan, we'll keep it short. It's Nantawan, but I'll abbreviate it to Nan. So Nan's working in this go-go bar. She's serving drinks. She's a real waitress. She'll, as far as going with customers, maybe one a month, two maximum, no more than that. Paul, on the other hand, he's quite an interesting character. He's about 40. He's not overweight. He's a fairly decent looking guy. He's made a lot of money. He lives in Bangkok full time. He's worked all his life for an oil company. He's got quite high up in the company. He's based in Bangkok. The work he needs to do, he can do with one meeting a week, and the rest of it can be done online. He's on a very, very good salary, and he's put quite a lot of money away, so money isn't an issue to him. When he goes out for a meal, he doesn't look at the price on menus. He just goes out and eats what he wants to eat. He spends what he wants to spend. He lives in a very, very nice apartment in Soi 24. It's right at the far end of Soi 24, so if you came in from Sukhumvit, go right to the end. I can't remember what that block is called. It might be the Ambassador, something like that. There's about 3 or 4 very tall apartment blocks, very nice. And back then, 20 years ago, he was paying 60,000 a month for this apartment. So I'm guessing now it would be at least 120,000 a month pre-COVID. So Paul's under no illusions. He knows Bangkok, he knows Thailand, he knows the Thai girls. You're not going to pull the wool over Paul's eyes. He's single, he plays a field, he goes out, he has lots of acquaintances, and he knows what it's all about. You know, the bar girls can tell him any story they want to, and he's not going to fall for it. So we're nearly ready to start the story. One more thing I have to tell you about Paul, and as I said, I'm going to have to talk in a roundabout way. So Paul had quite an unusual taste in women. Now, most of the guys that I've met in Thailand, their preferred look, let's put it that way, the preferred look of a girl for them would be very petite, slim, doll-like, that sort of thing. And most of the guys I've met there, that's the sort of girls they go for. Paul was different. He didn't like girls like that. Didn't like's the wrong word. They didn't attract him. What Paul liked, he liked, let's say, we'll keep it polite, let's say bigger girls. He liked big busts, big bums, and he wasn't keen on girls who had had children. So what he'd do, if he'd seen a girl that he was attracted to, he'd sit down with her, and the question always came out was about children. If she'd had children, he'd walk away, but he wouldn't ask her outright. He'd be quite clever about it, and he'd say something like, oh, are your children, do you have one child or two other girls or the boys? Just engage them in conversation, and if they had children, he'd kind of walk away. He's polite, buy them a drink, and he'd walk away. So this is quite important for the story. You have to understand this, that Paul, his typical woman that he liked was quite a big girl, and they're quite hard to find. They're difficult to find in Thailand because most of the girls are petite, they're Asian, they're small, and unless they've had children, which I've just said Paul wasn't keen on, it was he had quite difficulties finding girls that he was attracted to. So now that you understand that, we can begin the story. So Paul's out one night. He goes to Nana Plaza, as he always does. He goes out 3 or 4 times a week. He goes into this go-go bar, and this girl, Nan, she just started in the bar a few days behind the bar serving drinks, and she, you know, the uniform that they wear is normally a white blouse and a black skirt, something like that. Now, because Nan was a big girl, and when I say she was a big girl, I mean she was very big. So Paul noticed her. As soon as he walked in, he noticed her straight away. And you can sit at the bar in these go-go bars, but it's not really encouraged. They have a lot of seating areas, sofa areas, and guys will normally sit there so they can watch a stage. But it is possible to sit at the bar if you want to. Now, obviously, when Paul noticed Nan behind the bar, he made a beeline for the bar, and he sat there, and eventually he got speaking to Nan, and it was just a pure physical thing. So Paul went in a couple of times, got speaking to her. He wasn't, as I say, he knew what things were about, so he wasn't going to just ask her outright, do you want to come back to mine, because she was working behind the bar, and it might not offend her, but, you know, he wanted to just play it cool, as it were. Eventually the day came, he was having his drink at the bar, and he did pop the question. He sort of said to her, look, you know, do you want to come out with me on your night off, and we'll meet up? And, you know, she accepted. And just something I need to tell you about Nan. Paul didn't know this at the time, but Nan was actually married. Her husband he was working as a DJ in one of the other go-go bars. And I forgot to tell you, Nan was 26 at the time. I think her husband was about the same age. Now, unfortunately for Nan, there was a drug that was very popular with the Thais back then. It was called yaba. It was a amphetamine, and a lot of people, it destroyed a lot of lives, unfortunately. The police in Thailand, they can be very good when they want to be, and they've more or less stamped it out. Not completely, but there's not so many people using it as there were. But back then, around 2000, it was a major problem. And her husband, Nan's husband, he was a yaba user. And apparently what it does, you're up all night moving furniture around. He had no desire to spend the night with his wife, if that makes sense. So it had been a long time since Nan had engaged in anything like this. Obviously, being a young woman, Nan had needs as well, and she hadn't had those needs fulfilled in quite a long time. So Paul and Nan are now dating, they're seeing each other, and as always, the inevitable happens. They end up in Paul's room, and they have a heavy session, let's put it that way. Thoroughly enjoyed by both parties. The thing is with Paul, as I said earlier, it was very difficult for him to find a woman that he was really attracted to. This was actually the perfect recipe. Nan, she hadn't had her needs fulfilled in a long time. She thoroughly enjoyed Paul's company and what they got up to in Paul's apartment. And Paul was absolutely satisfied. Let's put it that way. So the relationship went on for some time. At this time, Paul still didn't know that Nan was married. There were clues, they were slight, but you might not necessarily pick up on them. Something that Paul found very strange is Nan would never spend the night with him. She'd stay late, she'd stay till 1 or 2 in the morning, but she had to go. She just made her excuses and she left. And Paul didn't like that, because a lot of times he did want her to spend the night in his apartment or several days. And she'd come round, he'd go to the bar, bring her out, and, you know, or he'd pay for a couple of days, whatever. But she had to go back to her place at 2. And the reason why she had to go back was because, as I've said to you already, she was married, but Paul didn't know this. Okay, so one day, this relationship, it was just, there was no love involved whatsoever. It was purely physical. Nan loved it and Paul loved it. They were both, they were enjoying each other's company. Nan would be laying on the bed watching a typical Thai soap on the TV. Paul would be on his PC they'd look at each other and they'd just go for it. This could happen up to 5 times a day. It really, really was just a physical relationship. They liked each other, but there was no pretense, there was no love. It was a pure physical relationship. And they basically couldn't keep their hands off each other. One day, they'd finished what they were doing on this particular time in the evening. Nan turned around to Paul and she said, Paul, let's go somewhere. Let's move out of Bangkok. Let's live somewhere. Paul thought, this is a bit strange. And she still didn't say anything. But she said to Paul, basically, she didn't want to stay in Bangkok. She wanted to get away. And if Paul took her, then she could spend all her time with Paul. So Paul thought about it and he thought, well, I'll give it a go. Why not? I mean, you know, he really enjoyed what was going on with Nan. And he eventually decided to take a place down in Pattaya. He rented a place. Nan went down with him. And eventually Nan told Paul that she was married. She'd been abused. Her husband had beat her. He was taking drugs and she just didn't want to be in that marriage anymore. But it's very, very difficult. It's not the same as in the West, you know, it's a different culture. You've got to be very, very careful what you do. Being in Pattaya, she was well away from it and she could relax. So something that was a little bit different with Paul, when he was going out with Nan, he enjoyed her company. So if he went to Walking Street or he went any of these bars, he went with Nan and he just did what he always does. But the difference was he had Nan on his arm and he enjoyed her company. She was an intelligent woman. She spoke quite good English, and you know, they'd go out for a meal. They'd go and sit in these beer bars on Soi 6 and Soi 8 and the beach road, and he'd take her everywhere and it was good fun. And eventually about 6 months had gone by and he hadn't tired of her at this point. But what started to happen is Nan started to restrict his activities, if that makes sense. So, you know, she'd be laying in the apartment on a bed watching a Thai soap. Paul had come in, looked at her and obviously had these strong feelings, wanted to go for it, and she'd reject him and say, I'm tired, or, you know, this hadn't happened before. He thought about it afterwards and he thought, well, you know, I've got this apartment, I've brought Nan to Pattaya and she's rejecting me, what's the point? So to cut a long story short, we're going to end it here because what Paul had decided, he just thought he'd had enough. Although he hadn't grown tired of Nan, he had grown tired of the rejection. It was getting more and more, she was rejecting him more and more. And in the end, he said to Nan, my business has asked, the company I work for have asked me to move to another country for about 4 months. We've got to give up this apartment. You'll have to go back home. And that's it. And basically that's the lie Paul actually told her. She didn't really have any choice. She couldn't do anything about it. They went their separate ways. And obviously Paul, he didn't go anywhere. He went back to an apartment in Bangkok. He stayed away from that bar for quite a while, but eventually he did go back in and he did see Nan. He kind of said to her, oh, I've just arrived back. You know, I did go overseas. I'm arrived back now. And he didn't proceed with, he didn't rekindle the relationship, let's put it that way. They kept it on a friendly basis. He bought her a drink every now and again, but that was it. So I hope you found that story interesting, guys. No broken hearts this time round, and I'll catch you for the next one. Thanks for watching this one.